Right, there you go, we're being recorded. Right, welcome everybody properly, and thank you for joining this Labour for European Future webinar today. So we are here with three brilliant people, all from Wales. CarwynJones, former leader of Welsh Labour, David Hanson, former MP, and Tonia Antoniazzi, current MP. And we're here to talk about the Welsh election results and the fact that they were really good and a real bright spot for the party nationally, and a real, cause for hope for all of us, I think, as we look forward towards the next general election. So obviously we'll hear from each of the speakers, and I'm very interested to hear what they have to say about how Welsh Labour did what it did a few weeks ago, but also what we can learn here in England, and maybe what Scotland could learn as well from Welsh Labour about how we as a party can recover on a national basis, and hopefully see results replicated in England and Scotland next time round that will take us into government, because that's what we all hope and work for. So without further ado, I will hand across to Carwyn, who will start us off today, and be interested to hear what you have to say. And then we'll go to Tonia and David, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, you can either ask them yourself, you can raise your hand using the raise hand button in the reactions tab, or you can type them in the chat, and I will put them to whoever we want to put them to. So David, Carwyn, you carry on, and thanks again for joining us today.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. Before I move on to the reasons why I think we were successful in this election just gone, I think it's worth reflecting what happened in 2011 and in 2016, because it lays the ground for what happened this year. In 2011, we had our best ever result. We had 43% of the vote. We were some 17 points ahead of the Tories. But in 2016, we saw the rise of UKIP. We lost nearly 8%, almost straight to UKIP in 2016. The Tories lost about 4 or 5 to UKIP. UKIP took, about 15% of the vote in the Assembly election in 2016. So we saw a substantial shift of support amongst a chunk of our supporters to UKIP. We then saw, of course, what happened in Wales in the Brexit referendum. And over the past few years, especially after 2019, we have been concerned, haven't we, about whether the perception that UKIP is a machine for turning Labour voters into Tory ones is something that applies across the whole of the UK. We know in some parts of the UK, and I'll come on to that at the end, that does seem to have been the case, not so in Wales. So what do we see this time around? We took back about a third of the vote that had gone to UKIP. The other third went roughly to the Tories. The other third dissipated itself amongst other parties. It meant that our vote went up by 5%. The Tory vote went up by 5%, so still keeping that 13-point margin that we had, and the Plaid vote remained static. Now you can either compare that vote to what happened in 2016, which you can, of course, or what happened in 2019. I think we can compare both. 2019 was not a good election for us, let's be honest. We saw many seats being lost, particularly a swathe across the northeast of Wales. And the Tories, there's no doubt about it, were ready to take those seats in the Senedd election. In the end, they took only one, the Vale of Clwyd. They did that by only 300 votes against a candidate who had very little chance to bed in. But nevertheless, in other seats, David's former seat, of course, a comfortable win. The same in Wrexham, reasonably comfortable. Same in Clwyd South. We just didn't see, my own seat in Bridgend, where we won quite easily, we didn't see a continuation of that momentum that the Tories had built up in 2019. So, a good result all round, and something we certainly would have settled for. I'm sure, I say we're not there anymore, but something we would have settled for before the election itself. The Tories will have been disappointed, even though they picked up 5 seats. You might think, well, a rise of 5% of their vote, an increase of 5 seats, they must be delighted, but compared to 2019, they're not. How then did this happen? In 2016, we were a long way behind in the opinion polls, a long way behind. We also had the challenge of UKIP. It wasn't quite as difficult, it's still difficult in the opinion polls across the UK in 2021, but we didn't have UKIP to contend with. The first advantage, I think, was incumbency. And we saw that being played out across the whole of GB. We saw the SNP profit from it in Scotland, and we saw Boris Johnson profit from it in some parts of England. If you were perceived to have handled the pandemic competently, then you were rewarded by the electorate. That's what happened in Wales, no doubt about that. People saw what Mark had done, and Mark was somebody who, I remember telling me, and then said this to the media, was somebody who was not comfortable with the media. He said, I don't like doing interviews very much. Well, to be honest, in the last year, I think he's shown everybody and himself that he's more than capable of doing that. And Mark has, I think, created a sense of trust amongst the electorate. People said to me over and over again, they trusted what Mark had to say, they had faith in him. And for a lot of people, that was the most important factor in this election. They had somebody who they took what he said as being true. They trusted him as a personality, and they then rewarded us with their votes. That is undoubtedly a factor in my view. But there's also the issue of identity politics. Now, none of us joined the Labour Party to engage in identity politics. We'd have joined other parties if we'd wanted to. But we do live in an age of identity politics, and we have to adapt to that. In the northeast of England particularly, voting Tory has come to be associated with people's English identity. And the expression of their national pride is through the Conservative Party and not through Labour. Now, that is a difficult position for us to be in, and that's not something that can be resolved overnight. It wasn't true across the whole of England, but it was certainly more prevalent in working class areas, in the northeast of England particularly, and I think that is bound up in identity politics. Scotland is all about identity politics. We know that because the position of the SNP. The same is at the moment, I think, true of Wales, but it expresses itself in a different way. There are many, many people who express their Welsh identity by voting Welsh Labour and not for Plaid Cymru, which is why Plaid Cymru remains static. Now, if you were a member of Plaid Cymru, you might on the one hand despair at the fact that all the hype that was there before the election, that Plaid were going to do really well, was not fulfilled, or you might take comfort from the fact that your party for the first time stood expressly on a platform of full independence and still got a fifth of the vote. Well, that's up to people applying to decide, and not for us. But there's no doubt that for a lot of people, voting Labour is an expression of their identity. Now, that's useful for us in Wales because we started this process back, Rodri first and me, back in 2007. We knew that a chunk of the electorate, not the majority, but a chunk of the electorate were the people who we call the red-shirted patriots, the people who put their Welsh football and Welsh rugby jerseys on, who were centre-left, who were strongly Welsh identity, but were not in favour of independence. The people who we'd lost in Scotland, the people who started to move to the SNP in 2007 and who continued on that journey, people who weren't in favour of independence, but became in favour of independence after several years of supporting the SNP. We managed not to do that in Wales. And that is an element of our success. It plays out differently in different parts of Wales, let's be honest about that. It's not uniform across Wales, but that certainly has been part of it. People have said to me quite often, well, you like us, you see the world like us, that's why we want to vote for you as a party. And they don't see that the expression of their identity as voting for a nationalist party. And that is something we expressly tried to prevent from 2007 onwards. Now that works in Wales, but of course, it means it's impossible to extrapolate that into what might work in Scotland or what might work in parts of England. The dynamic is very, very different. And I think the road back, particularly in the northeast of England, is a tough one, and one that will need many answers if we're going to become competitive. Hartlepool being one example, but also some of the council seats that we lost as well. And I'm not saying that chasing flags is the way that we should position ourselves as we look at trying to improve on our successes in England. I mean, from Wales's perspective, from my perspective, from Mark's perspective, we do need constitutional change. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this has people marching on the streets saying, what do we want? A voluntary partnership of four nations. What do we want? It now doesn't quite work very well as a slogan. But I think we're going to need to think more carefully about that in the future from what has been seen as an anarchy issue in order to be able to allow people to express, to share the multiple identities that they have within the UK as part of one of the constituent nations and as part of the UK itself. That might be part of the way back. But nothing's more annoying, is it, than to have two old Etonian prime ministers who appear to be more in tune with ordinary people. We have to ask ourselves why that is. The greatest disgrace in British politics is that Britain has never had a prime minister who was educated fully in a comprehensive school. Not one. Not one. It's crazy. You know, we have a situation where Theresa May, well, she passed the 11th, then it became a comprehensive school. Cameron was Eton, Boris Johnson was Eton. It's extraordinary that the education sector, that the vast majority of people in the UK attend, has never produced a prime minister. And we have to think about how we change that. Because there's, you know, I've dealt with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson, the one thing about Boris Johnson is he will just tell you what you want to hear. He wants to be popular. He doesn't need principles. You know, I sat down and discussed his airport plan with him, and he had that idea of putting an airport in what, from perspective in South or North Wales, looks like Holland. And I said, it's too far away. You know, people from Wales are not going to use it, and they may as well go to fly to Amsterdam. I said, you know, the end of Essex is too far for people in the rest of the UK. And his answer was, you know, he said, you're right. Well, you know, and this is something he'd been advocating for a long, long time. And so far he's got away with it. He can't forever, because you can't keep on saying yes to people all the time and agreeing with them, because eventually you're going to annoy somebody because you're going to go back on what you said to them. But you know, that time unfortunately hasn't yet come as far as Boris Johnson is concerned. So I can see now I'm coming to the end of my 10 minutes, just some thoughts from my perspective on why we were successful, you know, in Wales. And you know, let's remember that we started off the campaign behind the Tories in Wales in the opinion polls. You know, we were looking at losing a swathe of seats, you know, all the seats that we lost in the general election, possibly and more. Mark and his team turned it around, and you could feel the election coming back to us, particularly, I thought, in the last week. You know, we look at Delyn. I mentioned Delyn as an example there of a comfortable win for Hannah. Gower, Tonia, I mean, a swing to Rebecca in Gower. I thought it was an extraordinary result, because, you know, there were very few seats where there was an actual swing from the Tories to Labour. The Vale of Glamorgan was another one. But there's one rule in Welsh politics, above all else: never bet against Jane Hunt. Again, we've been proven absolutely right there. So just some thoughts from me. You know, I'm interested to hear the responses of others, because much as it gives us pleasure, I'm sure, to be successful in Wales, we can never be happy until we see our comrades across the whole of Britain winning power once again and getting a Labour government back in Westminster, because that, we know, is where the money can be distributed fairly and where we will have a proper hearing from a Labour government. Thanks, Mike.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carwyn. That was fascinating, as I knew it would be. Tonia, we'll come straight across to you, please.
Thanks, Mike. It's absolutely brilliant to be speaking after CarwynJones and being joined by David Hanson. Great in politics, and I've got a lot to learn from both of them, and it was really interesting listening to some of the things you said there, Carwyn, because they do genuinely reflect the current situation. And you know, I'll pick up on something that you just mentioned at the end there about Gower and what you got on the phones and on the doorstep, which was different from 2019. There wasn't that nastiness. There wasn't that kind of angry people, whether it was a bit about Brexit or our leader at the time. And it was much, much nicer. I know that one of my staffers is on the call, Adam, who was running the campaign, and for Rebecca, and one of the things we really noticed was people liked Kiama. They really respected you know, Mark and Vaughan and Welsh Labour. And it was one of the reasons why we've done so well, Welsh Labour has done so well, is because of having that ability to speak to people, to be on the ground and to represent everything that they do as well, which I know Carwyn has spoken about. But we have moved on, and so much has happened since 2019 that it's been quite a dramatic and seismic shift, and in the right direction. Because also I think the Welsh Labour government has been brilliant in, you know, in saying no, you know, it's not okay what you were saying about Brexit. It's the issues around us leaving the European Union, and I know that many of us aren't happy about it. We have to focus on our relationship with Europe at the moment, and for me, this is key, because when we see the Australian trade deal and we think about what is good in Wales, out of the terrible 15, 16 months that we have just come out of, well, we are not out of it yet, but we are coming out of, we have a government, a UK government, that is putting a trade deal into place which doesn't reflect us as a country, doesn't reflect the communities that we are looking at from farm to fork, what we need to be doing. If you think about, I think about my community initially, how much more we are aware of what is available around us. So when you think about agriculture and farming and fisheries, particularly here in Gower, we also think about, you know, how people are more aware of what is on their doorstep, of what they're buying. Now, I'd like to see the vision of, you know, the Welsh Labour now actually looking at what we can feed our everybody with, that it isn't out you know, too expensive and out of their reach, that we can actually be looking at strategies to make our local food more available and on their plate, instead of us having a UK government with, you know, trade deals that are basically an infringement on our you know, our ability to keep our farmers going. You know, we just not, they are so out of touch. And it made me laugh though, Carwyn, when you said about an Etonian Prime Minister. You know, it is disgraceful that people do have more in common, or feel like they've got more in common with Boris Johnson, my neighbour, who said, you always voted Tory. And I said, oh, that's fine. You can, you know, I wish you didn't, you know, why do you vote Tory? He said, well, you know, taxes. And also I think that Boris Johnson seems like quite a good laugh, somebody to have a pint with. I said, I'm a good laugh. I'm a hoot. You know, we can go for a pint in the pub. They've just got this buffoonery about a prime minister that is attractive to people. And it's just completely wrong. And I think we've seen that, particularly in the last couple of weeks. But, you know, we have done well in Gower, and it was wonderful to have Rebecca Evans, who has worked so hard as the finance minister and continued to keep her seat. And I'm really, really thrilled about that. But, you know, when we look about where we are now, the Labour policy, the Welsh Labour policies were ambitious and achievable. They're the real living wage for carers, looking at, you know, 20,000 low carbon social rent homes, everything that people wanted. They wanted to change their lives, and this was a way forward for them. And having those achievable policies really, really cut through, particularly the young person's guarantee. And we've got to make hay while the sun shines now as a Welsh Labour government. I think they've seen, our voters have seen how important it is moving forward that we move on. And I think one of the points that's been made is kind of like, what does Welsh Labour get wrong? And I find that very hard to kind of think about, because I don't think we do get much wrong in Wales, but I think we can do better. We can do better at working with UK Labour. We've got to build that relationship. I'm the chair of the Welsh PLP, so I've been chairing meetings that have been taking place every week throughout COVID with, if it wasn't Mark, it was another minister. And that relationship, and Carwyn will know that relationship was sometimes strained in the past while he was leader. And David would be able to talk about it more than I can. But what I've seen is a really, really good, strong relationship build as a result between Welsh MPs and our Welsh Labour Senedd, members of the Senedd. And I think that's a positive, and we need to build on that. And when we're having just, conversations about further devolution and what we want, it's those conversations that need to be happening more, and being able to have our differences and to be able to talk them through. There is no doubt that we have to look at moving forward. The Senedd, unfortunately, doesn't, it needs more members of the Senedd. It has to move forward and look at further devolution, and how that's done is an interesting conversation. UK Labour, are we relating to our constituents in Wales? I would say yes, because we work together as a team, but we need to also be thinking about the leader, his relationship with Wales and with Scotland. I think Anna Sawan now in Scotland is an excellent leader for Welsh Labour. He's absolutely brilliant. So that as well. And I think it's all about dialogue, having that dialogue and being able to work together as a team. There's a lot of people that don't really get devolution, because Carwyn, it's not simple, is it? It's quite complicated. And then you see further devolution with, you know, unsuccessful devolution with the mayors, particularly with Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham and across England. Now, how does that work? I mean, I would question my understanding of that devolution, but that is where I think there's so much more work that we can be doing as a party to be informing each other and working together. Now, I've got a really, really great briefing, which has been prepared for me, but I always blather on. So if I'm going on time-wise, can you let me know, Mike? So I think the handling of the pandemic has been brilliant. I think that in Wales has been great. And people, just conversations with friends, parents, people that probably wouldn't have voted Labour in the past would have probably voted Plaid. They didn't, because they knew that they were in safe hands, and that goes so far. I think the Tories have shown themselves to be irrelevant in Wales. It's great to see the back of people like UKIP. That's a positive step in the right direction for us as a country. Now, how do we get through the next few years? I think we've got to focus on the relationship with the party and what we want a European Wales, you know, Wales's place in Europe to look like. And I know lots of people in the Senedd are working on that. And I really, really cherish the opportunity to work alongside colleagues, because I'm one of the members on the Council of Europe. And that is pretty much the only link that we have in with any parliament in, well, it is the only link we have with any European Parliament now. So I think that is a really, really important working group that needs to focus on working with elected representatives in Wales. And just to finish on the boundary review, obviously, if it is of great concern to me, because it is potentially that if it follows anything that's been before, my constituency will break itself up into 3 parts, and therefore Gower won't exist. But obviously they're redrawing those boundaries, so we will see. But I think, will Welsh Labour have less of a presence in Westminster? Well, we're due to lose 8 seats, so yes, we will. It affects the Tories in North Wales, which I know David could probably speak more about. But you know, we have got to be seriously looking at strategically putting people into, you know, not put in, but looking at where we can best exploit those boundary changes in order to strengthen Welsh Labour. Because if that, you know, in the election, which is meant to be 2024, although we are being spoken to by you know, we're being told that to expect it in 2023. So whether that will be pre or post boundary changes, we shall see. But it's going to be an interesting few years. And coming into politics in 2017, I'd just like to end it on this. It's been very, very interesting. So I bet, did David have that much excitement in his 28 years in Parliament? I'm sure the last few were the most exciting. And the most important as well for the future of the country. But yeah, and we've got to have Labour in government in Westminster for it to work for the betterment of everybody. So thanks, Mike.
You're on mute, Mark.
Thanks, Tonia. That was really great, as I knew it would be. David, we'll come straight across to you, and then after that we'll have time for Q&A. So if you've got questions, post them in the chat or raise your hand using the tab. So David, go ahead. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. I don't want to start off by disagreeing with Tonia, but my most exciting time in Parliament was when we had Labour government between 1997 and 2010. Of course. Because from our point of view, we were doing things like the minimum wage, sure start, devolution, reform of the Lords, a whole range of policies which I was able to vote for, which made a real difference on the ground in the constituency I represented and was a candidate for 35 years in total. So making a Labour government is the key, and having a Labour government is the key to making a difference. And that brings me to my sort of first point. When I thought about this, I wrote down 6 points just to think, and obviously Carwyn and Tonia have covered some of those points. But my starting point is devolution wasn't greatly popular in my part of the world in 1999. When the referendum took place, it only just scraped through in 1997 and in devolution in 99. And when Mark Drakeford's predecessors, Carwyn, Rodri, Alan Michael, were in post between 99 and recently, they've done a lot of good work, but I don't think genuinely that much of that good work was recognised, or the differences devolution could make was recognised to the extent it was potentially over the last 18 months, 2 years. And that's because I think with COVID, with the pandemic, people have seen devolution operating in a way where decisions can be taken speedily, quickly, for the interests of people with focus in a constructive, positive way, at the same time as looking at potentially chaos on behalf of the government in the UK on dealing with the very same issues. And that, I think, has brought some spark into people's minds that actually, hang on a minute, we have free school meals here that Marcus Rashford is campaigning for in England. We have free car parking at hospitals, previous Labour governments have put in place. We have different policies on a whole range of things across the board where devolution has actually meant a difference in policy, but which I would contend that people potentially in my part of the world, in North Wales, have only started to really clock in the past 18 months, 2 years. And that has been a key factor in terms of the vote for it if you value it campaign that we ran up in North Wales. If you do value these things, vote for it, because the Conservatives would have taken those things away. And having lost seats that we'd held for a long period of time, Dell in my own constituency, Wrexham, Clwyd South, Vale of Clwyd, Ynys Môn, which are seats that we held in North Wales until the last election. My phone's going off, hang on. Those seats until we held until the last election, but also Clwyd West, Aberconwy, seats that we held in elections between 97 and 2010 that made that government possible at that time. So I think the Vote for It and Value It campaign on the devolution issues were extremely important. That really leads to the second issue, which is incumbency. Because Mark Drakeford, because the team were on the television, because they were focused, because they were dealing with these issues day to day, that shows that incumbency matters. That's a thing we can take across the board to Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, to Tracy Braben in West Yorkshire, to Dan Norris, the newly elected mayor in the west of England, to the newly elected mayor in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We have an opportunity to use incumbency to spread Labour values, Labour policies, and to show Labour in action in constituencies where we don't currently have a Labour member of Parliament, where we've lost in the past. The third factor I want to put in, and there's no definitive information on this yet, but for the first time ever, thanks to policies that Carwyn and the team and others had introduced and trailed beforehand, 16 and 17-year-olds voted in Wales in the Assembly election. Now, I don't know as yet, and I haven't looked in detail what the turnout was, but I suspect that the turnout, whatever it was bigger for Labour voters than it was elsewhere. In my own constituency in Delham, we won by 3,000 votes in the Senedd election. For the Police and Crime Commissioner in the same constituency, exactly, we won by 700 votes. In the top-up, we won by 2,000 votes. Now, what difference did differential voting mean, where people were either voting because they're 16 and 17-year-olds in an Assembly election, Senedd election, or they're voting other parties in the Police and Crime Commissioner and or in the regional vote? What's that differential vote, and how can we squeeze that down to make sure people vote Labour? There's been a discussion, this obviously is a Labour for Europe meeting group, about the impact of Brexit. My constituency voted for Brexit in 2016, even though I campaigned against it. In the 2017 election, that hadn't been defined, but people thought Brexit was done. So they could still vote Labour because they thought Brexit was done. By the time 2019 came around, they realised that they had Brexit hadn't been done. They didn't know what Brexit meant, but Brexit hadn't been done. We hadn't left the European Union. So they had to vote for a political party that would deliver that. And we simply, as a political party, from Labour's perspective, and I couldn't vote for a type of Brexit that those people wanted. So as well as the leadership challenges in 2019, which are different, well-known, understood, and part of the challenge in 2019, the issue of Brexit was that we thought we voted for it. It didn't happen, but we were happy to vote Labour in 2017. And in 2019, we had a confused message from the Labour Party. We had people like me saying I couldn't vote for certain forms of Brexit because it would have been bad for the country on issues that are now commonplace, known to be bad, like the Irish border, farming, trade, planes, ships, cars, and general trade issues. So people voted in 2019 for parties that would deliver Brexit. But in 2021, that split of people in the constituencies such as mine was much easier to come back to Labour because Brexit had been done. And they're not Conservatives, they're not potentially even voting for the Brexit party anymore because we lost UKIP voters and people who went to the Conservatives last time had come back to us. So I think the key aberration of the 2019 election was one where people were genuinely saying, we want Brexit done, we don't like your leader, we don't feel confident in Labour. Two of those three factors were removed in 2021, and the incumbency and the value of devolution and the 16 and 17-year-olds gave an impetus to actually help support the party in a wider sense. I want to just put a note of caution, though, however. And I've got to look at my piece of paper for this note of caution because the figures are on it. Labour has never lost in North Wales the regional top-up seat elections, ever. Not in 99, not in 2003, not in 2007, not in 2011, not in 2016, and not in 2021. But in 2007, in 2003, and in 2099, the second party in North Wales was Plaid Cymru. It wasn't the Conservative Party. In 2011, in 2016, in 2021, it's been the Conservative Party who've been second, and the Conservative Party who's been getting closer every time in that top-up vote in second place. This time we won the regional list in North Wales by just 6,000 votes. We've won it before by 10 or 15,000 votes. The Conservative Party in constituencies even like mine, in Delyn constituency at this election, the Conservative Party put on 7.7% vote. Labour put on 4.2% vote. We won the seat still, but the Conservative vote went up. That's because there are people who are still very strongly Conservative, strongly backing the pitch for Boris Johnson, strongly backing the government, strongly looking at an alternative to Labour. And where we have gone, I think, here is we've managed to get ourselves back into a two-party position in many of the constituencies in Wales. In North East Wales, it's not a Plaid Cymru, it's not a Liberal position, it's a Conservative Labour fight. And in 2019 at the general election, that Conservative Labour fight showed that people were losing seats like mine to the Conservative Party because people at a local constituency level, we had an extra 1,000 votes in for the Liberals in Delyn. I lost by 865 in 2019. We had an extra 1,000 votes for the Liberals, who voted largely, I think, on the issues of Brexit. We had an extra 100 votes for Plaid Cymru in 2019 over the 2017 figure, because people were voting for that. In 2021, people realised if they didn't vote for Labour, they'd have a Conservative Assembly Senedd member, and they had to vote for that because they valued it. They valued what Labour had done. They'd valued the devolution, and they valued the approach and incumbency that Mark Drakeford had given. So my lessons, I think, for the future are simply twofold. How can we make that forward offer that we put in the leaflets on green issues, on care work, on education guarantees, on safer communities, on the things that matter to people into a UK context? How can we get our leader engaged with the community to talk about positive things, about what Labour does in the regions, in Wales, in Manchester, in Liverpool, in the North East, in West Yorkshire, in Bristol and the West Country? How can we show what Labour does? How can we contrast that to the fiasco that we've got with government policies? Because all the things the Labour government have done in Wales are about the simple Labour values of for the many, not for the few. They're about community, they're about opportunity, they're about encouraging people to do the best they can in life, they're about giving people a start, they're about providing backup to tackle poverty and tackle social justice. And if we can do that in Wales, in Merseyside, in Manchester, in a devolved context, we can do it nationally, supporting those devolved governments and looking internationally as a whole. So my message is, I sit here, I can look out my bedroom window here, I can see Merseyside from my bedroom window, where we've had Labour MPs and a Labour local mayor re-elected, despite challenges in that community now. I can see my own local area where we've rebuilt and refought back Labour because we hurt in 2019. And I can say to people now that there's real opportunity to give a national message to support a positive, value-based Labour government, to show what we can do in government and to make those changes for the future. But what we have to do is remember who the target is. People will continue to vote Conservative. We have to show those people that there's a competent government with a competent leader, with policies that are deliverable and affordable, with policies that will lead to aspiration, policies which will ensure that we're outward looking. And that's what we've done in Wales. We've shown a competent leader, we've shown policies that deliver, and we've shown the value of that government in office. We have to translate that to a national UK government.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Right, if you've got questions, now's the time. So feel free to raise a hand or post your question in the chat. But first off, I guess just one maybe kind of quite practical question from me, which is about the links between Welsh Labour, Scottish Labour and UK Labour, and also then between all of those and, mayors and local authorities and the Labour LGA and so on. Are the links between all of those different organisations and bodies and people good enough, strong enough, do you think, in terms of feeding back information from door knocking, communicating what voters think of us in different parts of the country, feeding back information about how different campaigns went, how different candidates were responded to, how policies were responded to, and so on? Or do you think that's something that we need to be doing better to enable us to do better in all different parts of the country in local and devolved elections, but then also to do better when it comes to a general election? I don't know if you work in campaign teams in Welsh Labour or anywhere else, but I'm guessing that you know more about that than I do. I don't know who wants to take that. Carwyn, go ahead.
Well, the simple answer to your question, Mike, is it's not at all good enough, the relationship between different elements of the party across GB. I mean, Richard Leonard and I think overlap by about 2 years in terms of leadership of our respective parties. I've never spoken to him, let alone met him. So that's quite extraordinary. I've never met Andy Burnham in his role that he has at the moment. I very rarely met Sadiq Khan. I met Nicola Sturgeon all the time. All the time. Arlene Foster, Peter Robinson, Martin McGuinness. I knew them better than I knew Labour leaders elsewhere in the UK. And that is a weakness for us as a party. We do need to find a structure that allows us to come together from different parts of the UK in order to learn from each other. That's what this is all about. Surely the answers don't lie in Westminster alone. Westminster is an important part of finding the answer, no question about that. But I certainly found there was a tendency at one time in the party to think that there was nothing that could be learned from anywhere else. I got on well with Ed Miliband. My boy used to wind me up at times because we'd get a hammering from David Cameron. He'd pick on our health service. We'd provide him with all the details to fight back, and he never would. And we felt that there was no sense of, even though there was no personal animosity, there was no sense of being part of a team at all at that time. It has improved. I mean, the one thing that's certainly improved, Tonia touched on this. I was in the Assembly in '99. The relationship with the PLP, Welsh PLP, was a traumatic one until maybe 2007, 2008. And then it improved. We had our moments, but it's improved greatly since then, hugely. I mean, the relationship was one of suspicion in the middle of the last decade, in the middle of the first decade of the century. There's no question about that. It has improved hugely, and that's, I think, to everyone's credit. But we desperately need to find a mechanism within the party where we can bring together the leaders of the parties in the devolved parliaments, the mayors, of whom we have, we've got so many metro mayors now, and Sadiq as well, and our colleagues in Westminster to come together and start working on how we plan, how we plan together and how we learn from each other. We don't have that at the moment.
No, okay, that's what I thought, but it's disappointing to hear. Go ahead, Tonia.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe you didn't meet Jason Leonard. Jason Leonard, that's the rugby player.
No, he'd retired by then.
Sorry, that's incredible. I mean, I knew it was bad, but really, it's inexcusable, isn't it? That was a situation when you overlap by 2 years. I would like to say that the relationship with the Senedd has improved massively since I've been in post, and that's 4 years now. I mean, David could make a comment on it, but I was just wondering, you've got the NEC and you're on the NEC, Carwyn. Is it something that you could bring up there? I think it's something that needs to be possibly addressed from the national executive level down, but we have got to we must do better, and I believe that Welsh MPs have got a much better relationship now, and I'm very, very proud of the relationship that we do have, and we have joint meetings with members of the Senedd, and I hope that will what we need to do is embrace what has happened and has been good for the team. But also there needs to be a lot of outreach and education as well about devolution, which I did talk about on all levels. And we need to make sure that is facilitated, and it's certainly something that I will continue to work on in my role as chair of the Welsh PLP.
Sorry, I was on mute there. David, did you want to add anything?
I think again, I was around between 92 in Parliament through to when this Assembly was first set up in 97, and there was a genuine concern from members of Parliament at the time about how it would work and how the implication of that friction was there, particularly for MPs who'd been around for a long time. I got elected first time in 92, but people who'd been there since 1970 or 1959 had got into a way of working which meant that it was a challenge to work together. But what I would say now is that difference is making a difference on the ground. There is an opportunity to develop alternative policies. There's an opportunity to develop a Labour agenda at a time when there isn't a Labour UK national government in the United Kingdom, and that's a positive thing for the future. And in terms of campaigning activities, we should be using how that campaigning operation works across the country in targeting and working for Westminster seats, because if we can win Delyn again, or Clwyd South, or Wrexham, or Bridgend in a Senate election, there is absolutely no reason why those values can't deliver those seats in a general election. And there's no reason, I see Jackie on the call, Jackie Jones on the call, there's no reason why we can't have won seats at Westminster that we've held previously. Clwyd West, Ynys Preseli Pembroke are all seats, Vale of Glamorgan are all seats that we have held at Westminster level, and our focus now should be to show the benefits of Labour government so that we can target those seats for the future. Just one final point on the boundary review. I didn't touch on earlier. We are going to go from 40 seats in Westminster to 31 seats probably, which means there will be fewer Labour members of Parliament and there will be more opportunity for difficult fights, and we don't know how it's going to pan out in terms of the new boundaries elsewhere. We still have to work hard to make sure that we get candidates in place and that we do ultimately focus on the interests of local people. One of the successes of this campaign is we were talking to people about the issues that mattered to them and showing them in a way that says aspiration, security, positive, competent government, and a leadership that maybe didn't seem too exciting before the election, with due respect to Mark, but which ultimately is a leadership which was delivering, which competently delivered, and which did what it said it was going to do. And that's what people want in life. Most people aren't interested in politics. They want competent, good government on their side, addressing their issues. Welsh Labour delivered that 3 or 4 weeks ago. You can deliver it again in 2023-24.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Right, I'm just going to add Jackie Jones to the screen. So Jackie was Welsh Labour MEP. and also a candidate in the elections that we've just had. So Jackie has a question or comment, so go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, thank you everyone. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I came late, Carwyn. I didn't hear what you had to say, so I'm sorry if I say something that you've already said. If I can make 3 different comments. One is from a lawyer's perspective. I think Dicey needs to be argued against, and Dicey was talking about the sovereignty of Parliament all the time. It's not real what he said, because we know that the European Union superseded the supremacy of Parliament, and it was a supranational institution, so it can be done. And I think if we have the Commission on Constitutional Affairs, or whatever it comes out to be in Wales, then we have to really strongly argue. And it's not just a nerdy point, it's a real point. It's really important, because this is argued all the time in courts of law. So that's the first one. Secondly, is about PES, so about the Party of the European Socialists. We are part of that network, and I'm one of 2 UK law representatives on PES Women, and we can exchange ideas and get a lot of information and solidarity across Europe, much wider than the European Union, with that organizations, and they come up with some fantastic policy ideas as well, and I think we're not incorporating or not considering them enough, I don't think. And then finally, on the European Union, I've banged on about this story, Mike, for a long time, but it's the Conference on the Future of Europe is happening right now. And as former MEPs, we're allowed to actually, as being part of the Association of Former MEPs, we're allowed to put forward suggestions for events, online or otherwise, and different policy areas. And I think we should take part in that. Whether it's Wales or UK specific, that's a matter for us. But we can organise that in conjunction or alongside the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is happening across the European Union now, and have that broader conversation with the people of Wales, with the people of the UK, of what they would like to see our relationship to be. So I would urge whoever to try and get that sorted and to facilitate that. There are lots of MEPs who would help with that as well. Or if I can make a 4th comment, yeah, Preseli, Pembrokeshire, it was amazing. We got really close, 1,400 votes. We closed the gap from 4,000 and had a swing of 9.3%. I think the one of the main reasons we lost is, the voter turnout was higher, 51.8%. Not that I memorized this or anything, but Plaid votes doubled to over 6,000 because the Plaid candidate was a really strong candidate, Chris Thomas, who was a councillor, and very strong on environmental issues. So, and it was really problematic getting out on the doorstep. But Tonia came down and canvassed with us as well. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jackie. Right, we've got a question in the chat from Philip Watson, which I'm just going to rephrase slightly. So he says, how can we expose the danger that Brexit presents? So the way I'm going to reframe that is just thinking about the different ways that Welsh Labour and UK Labour have handled Brexit since the 2019 election. So that, the caricature, which isn't quite true, is that UK Labour has said little on the subject and hasn't really held the Tories to account on the impact of Brexit. Although it's not entirely true. I mean, Jack Dromey, who I think still has the brief, is quite vocal on the issue, so is Rachel Reeves. But it certainly is true that Keir Starmer hasn't made opposition to Brexit and Brexit harms kind of a signature policy of his leadership. So I actually don't know the details of how Mark Drakeford and Welsh Labour have handled it and how they presented the issue to the Welsh people generally, but also in the election campaign. So if one of you knows the answer to that, would be really interesting. But also just interesting to hear from each of you about your views on that and what you think that Welsh Labour and UK Labour can be doing differently to A, put forward what's true and educate the public, but then B, of course, to maximise our vote share as we approach more elections. So who wants to take that first?
I'll take the floor, if you like, Mike. The really interesting thing, I think, is I don't feel, certainly in North Wales, that Brexit played a part in the Assembly Senedd election at all. Really, it wasn't on the doorstep. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't a big issue. But What is happening now is that the implications of a poorly thought through Brexit, of promises that have not been made, are hitting home in areas like mine. We have, for example, the North Wales corridor linking Holyhead with Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. What is happening with those exports? What is happening with that border control? What is happening with the Irish border, which is a real live issue in the middle of the sea just off Holyhead? The farmers that cover the thousands of sheep that cover the hills around where I'm living here in North Wales now, what are they doing and how are they working in relation to the export of their products? What are the barriers and the tariffs on exports of cheese, on exports of milk products, on exports of lamb, on exports of beef? What is the confusion there? And the sort of simple line of the government that Brexit means Brexit and this has happened. None of these things have been thought through in terms of the economic implications. 5 miles down the road, we make aeroplanes, aeroplane wings. We make cars at Toyota. We make cars at Vauxhall's and Ellesmere Port just over the border. We've got thousands of people working in those industries, and there's no clarity really about what the relationship is with the exports of those goods and the way in which free trade works. Recently, we've got in North Wales, lots of hospitality venues are not opening because there's not been the level of demand, number one, or the level of economic support from people who used to work in those industries, who lived and worked from the European Union, who've gone back home during the pandemic. There's a whole range of things that are just impacting on the day-to-day lives of people. And whilst I think, it wasn't an issue in the Senedd campaign, the economic consequences of Brexit on jobs, on security, on the way in which we do business, be it cars, planes, sheep, food, or on the border, are all starting to, be seen by people in their practical consequences. So I think what we have to try and do is that there can't be, in my view, a campaign now to rejoin. That might be a controversial view that people want to argue against. What there can be is a campaign to say, this has been a very badly thought through plan. There has been no thinking of the economic consequences, and we have to now look at how we drag the economy of places like North Wales back into a place where we can do better business with Europe as well as the world. A trade deal with Australia on sheep is all very well and good, but it undermines the Welsh sheep industry, where those sheep were exported previously in largest numbers, 75%, to France. That can't be right. So how do we expose those lack of economic thinking and political thinking by the current government who gave us this form of Brexit? And how do we respond to those challenges in the immediate future? We're not going to rejoin the European community next year or even the year after, but we have to maintain economic and social political links and work those things through. And that will be where my starting point is. People are in a position now where they see the Brexit that was given is one that has not delivered on their economic necessities. And that's where we should find as our starting point.
Brilliant, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that? Either on, Carwyn, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think the pandemic has either delayed or masked the impact of Brexit. Demand hasn't been what it usually would normally be expected to be, so we haven't seen as many goods go through the ports. People haven't been travelling, so they haven't seen the effect of the lack of investment, for example, in border controls. Heathrow will be, it'll be like a mad auction when travel numbers get back to normal, because bluntly, they don't have enough border control officials to get people through passport control. That's been masked as well. There are very few people traveling on the ferries. So again, the pressure on customers, particularly going through the Irish ports, isn't there in the same way that it would be. So all these things, the hospitality sector, there hasn't been the demand there. Now we're hearing that there's a lack of staff available in hospitality. We know that traditionally a good chunk of that staff of those staff have come from Eastern Europe. They're not here anymore, and all of a sudden the staff are not there. But that's happening now. So it's taken until now for all this to begin to be noticed. I think we will see Brexit play out badly, I have to say, and a lot of it is down to sheer incompetence on the part of the UK government. I mean, my wife's from Belfast. Don't talk to her about Brexit. She's a Catholic, right? She and my kids have got Irish passports. I haven't. That's a sore point, but anyway, I'll have to deal with that in my own time. The reality in Northern Ireland is it's put a border in the middle of the Irish Sea. It's directly against what Boris Johnson said would happen. And now, of course, the unionist community is kicking off about it. The only other alternative is to have a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Good luck with that one, because if you thought things are bad there now, it would get a lot worse there if that were to happen. And then you've got David Frost, who's the negotiator, saying, well, the protocol is a bad idea. It's not being implemented properly. He negotiated it. Boris Johnson agreed it. And here we have these two idiots, frankly, who are basically saying, well, we didn't think it would work out this way. I could have told them that. So that is one area. The other area, the Australian trade deal, you cannot replace the European single market with Australia and New Zealand, who make up just over half the population of the UK, and so they're small and further away. It's like a Father Ted episode, isn't it? It's small and further away. Australia's not a market for our lamb or our beef. It's way too far away. And actually, Britain's not much of a market for Australia and New Zealand either. You've got China on their doorstep. They've got India as well, with an increasingly wealthy population. The Middle East is closer, and the Australians were importing 7 million head into the Emirates. So they're far better markets for them. But of course, they're going to be happy about entering a market of 60 million people. Why wouldn't you, even if it's further away? The quid pro quo for not just British farmers and British consumers is basically nothing. I mean, what exactly? How do our lives become easier if tariffs are removed from produce from Australia and New Zealand? It just isn't there. And our farmers will be sold on the river. The fishing community have already been sold down the river, forgive my pun, because the reality is you can have as many fishing rights as you want in British waters, but if you've got no market to sell those fish into, you're stuffed. And that's what's happened to them. They've only been kept afloat with government money now. They don't have a market for what they're catching, because British consumers tend not to eat British fish. 90% of fish is exported. So those two things are bubbling away at the moment. How do we deal with that politically? We've developed a tendency over the last few years to shy away from Brexit. And I do agree with Dave, Brexit wasn't an issue in the Senedd election, because when we talk about Brexit, we get our fingers burned. I think we now have to start thinking to ourselves, the tactic with the Tories is to have a go at them for selling Britain down the river, saying, look, these are the people who are behind Brexit. And what have they done? They've sold out our fishing communities. They're selling out our farming communities. Who benefits from all this? And we've got to attack them from that angle. You are the people who said you're standing up for Britain. In fact, you are destroying Britain. It's not going to happen overnight. People aren't going to suddenly change their minds and say, oh, well, Brexit perhaps was a bad thing. But we have to really take that political angle and have a go at them from that angle. You are not standing up for Britain. We would as a party.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carwyn. Well, we're coming up on time. Tonia, I'll come to you and on that question, but also if you've got any final comments, and then Jackie, if you've got any comments as well. But go ahead, Tonia.
Oh, thanks, Mike. And I am, what I just wanted to say is, it's all well and good. I want to have a T-shirt which says "I told you so" on it, but politically, that's not going to get us anywhere, and it's going to give the Tories ammunition. And while we all know it and we believe it, it's how we play the next few years is so important, as both David and Carwyn have spoken about, and it's our relationship with Europe. And I just wanted to end on, this is what the Welsh government does so well. It's doing it differently, and that does have financial implications, which in a post-COVID world is even more challenging for a devolved country to have to deal with. But I'd like to see a different relationship, a better deal for farmers and for fisheries, and also for other industries. And I want, and I say this genuinely from the bottom of my heart, with a 17-year-old who's going to be doing his A-levels next year, I want to have an ambitious future for our young people, not one that ends, that has an island mentality, one that gives him the opportunities to do what he can. And whether that it'll be in Europe or anywhere in the world, I think we do our children down you know, this Tory government has and will continue to do so by not giving them the right tools, and has taken away a lifetime of opportunities by exiting the EU. But we've just got to keep fighting for that. And I'm, you know, working on several things around the touring scheme as well. And I just think we have got to keep going. And that's what drives me forward. It's the young people, it's jobs, it's our communities, and that's what that's why we're in the job. That's what we're here for, and I love it. It's brilliant, and I'll continue to fight for it. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today amongst these two greats, David and Carwyn, and or actually three greats, and Jackie as well, who's an absolute superstar. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Tonia, and to David and Jackie and Carwyn as well. It's been great to have you with us, and I've certainly learned a lot today, although I think we could probably go on for quite a lot longer talking about all of these issues. You know, perhaps first and foremost, how the rest of the country learns from the successes that we've seen, thankfully, in Wales under Welsh Labour. So we'll leave it there, but this will go up online on YouTube. Our next event, I think, is our day conference, which is on Saturday, the 12th of June. So if you haven't signed up for that, the details will be on our website, and they're also on our Facebook page.